So I think we've been seeing something really fascinating and disturbing in kind of public discourse over the last year or so, when it comes to the way that Jews are discussed in American public discourse. And the way I would put it is this, that I think we are seeing a kind of discussion about Jews that now resembles the discussion that we've been experiencing for decades and decades about Muslims. What do I mean by that? In the wake of September 11th, it started before September 11th. You could probably go back decades before that. Certainly September 11th. The American public discourse has been trying to understand why there are certain Muslim organizations that do things that we don't like. So, for instance, obviously Al-Qaeda on after September 11th and later ISIS. And one of the arguments that has been very dominant in American public culture, particularly on the right, is the idea that if there are Islamist organizations that are attacking the United States or committing, human rights atrocities, that reflects something particular in Islam, right? And so all of us can remember people kind of quoting, cherry picking quotes from the Quran and basically suggesting that Islam itself is hostile to human rights or preaches violence, basically an attempt to try to take an identity-based explanation for understanding why ISIS acts the way it does, or Al Qaeda, or for that matter, the Iranian government, rather than understanding these movements and regimes as part of a global political structure that's responding in various different ways. And I think what we've seen over the last year are kind of echoes of that on the American right about Israel. You can see it in Tucker Carlson's commentary. You can see it in Candace Owens' commentary. You can see it in most extreme form in Nick Fuentes' commentary when these people are seeing Israel doing things that they don't like. And they're right to be upset about what Israel is doing. Israel has committed a genocide in Gaza. It's entrenching its apartheid system in the West Bank. It's now displaced more than 1 million people's homes in Lebanon. People should be outraged about this, and they should want the U.S. to stop supporting these terrible abuses of human rights. But what we see on the right, and I wrote about this in a column in the New York Times, what we see often on the right now is that the attempt to make sense of the things that Israel is doing that these folks don't like, whether it's abuses against Palestinians or abuses against Lebanese people or kind of trying to bring the United States into wars in the Middle East. But the explanation suggests that the reason Israel is doing this has to do with something about it being Jewish, that there's a kind of identity-based argument. So just like you're trying to explain what Al-Qaeda or ISIS is doing by reference to something about Islam, you try to make an argument that the way to understand what Israel is doing by reference to something about Jewishness or Judaism. And so now you see people like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes literally quoting the Talmud to try to explain what Israel is doing, is that's the source of Israel's violence or Israel's inhumanity. Again, just as people would be quoting the Quran in order to say, you see, this is why Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Iranian regime is acting the way they're acting. Now, I don't want to suggest that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in the United States today are equivalent. They're really not equivalent. They're both rising, but Islamophobia is much, much more prevalent among people who hold positions of power in American government. We have politicians who speak in a way about Muslims that no American prominent politician speaks about Jews. Donald Trump literally said, Islam hates us, right? It's still really inconceivable to imagine an American politician saying that Judaism hates us. But what we are seeing rising from prominent figures on the anti-Israel right in the media is a discourse that I think, not surprisingly at all, in some ways recycles the way that people like Carlson have been talking about Muslims for many, many years. They've taken this same template, this civilizational template, this idea that that the enemies of the United States, by which they really mean the enemies of kind of white Christian Americans and Europeans, are are motivated by some kind of civilizational difference that you can understand by virtue of their kind of alien religion and ethnicity. And I think this is fundamentally wrong. And it's really, really important that progressives recognize it's wrong and recognize that Israel, in its terrible misdeeds and crimes that it's committing, is not doing so because there's anything peculiarly Jewish about displacing people from their homes, about attacking other countries, about overseeing a system of apartheid. That Israel is deeply integrated into a world system in which the United States and American imperialism is the most dominant fact. That Israel is acting in ways that in very, very reminiscent of the way that white Western Christian countries have behaved in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in many different settler colonies. And that it's always important to have a universal language to describe what Israel is doing, just as it was so important to have a universal language to describe what Islamist terrorist organizations are doing, to see these as part of systems and to understand that all human beings are capable of terrible crimes, and that the danger in the way that Carlson and Fuentes and Owens talk is that it's actually a way of trying to let white Christian Western countries off the hook, is to say, Israel is this other terrible thing that's the product of this peculiarly anti-Western alien civilization called Judaism or Jewishness, and we are not like that, right? This is what Carlson is getting at when he says things like Israel hates Europeans, right? In fact, Israel could not do what it has done from the very beginning without the support of Europeans. To this day, it's deeply entrenched and entangled in that system. And it's important for people who want to change American policy towards Israel and who want to oppose what Israel's doing to be clear about the terms in which they are making this criticism and not to fall into this trap of suggesting a kind of civilizational divide between Jews on the one hand and white Western Christians on the other, or to suggest that Israel's misdeeds are the result of a particular Jewish pathology. They're not. They're the one particular expression, a terrible expression in today's moment of the kinds of systems of oppression, of settler colonialism, of imperialism, of ethno-nationalism that we have seen across history and that we see all over the world, and they must be fought as systems of oppression, not in opposition to one particular ethnic or religious group.